On today's show, Summer League is now officially over for the Atlanta Hawks as they complete their 5-game run in Las Vegas. We'll talk about that, as well as the latest buzz on Pascal Siakam, Clint Capela, and more. All of that on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1522 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Sunday evening into Monday. And today's show is brought to you by the folks at PrizePicks. If you're a first-time user, get 100% deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That is PrizePicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. I also want to tell you at the top of the podcast, make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Please subscribe. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts, places like Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. And again, thank you for being here as always. And it's a final episode covering at least Summer League game action. We'll probably have some more analysis on what transpired during Summer League in the coming days, but the Hawks run is now over in Las Vegas. We'll touch on the game itself this evening, a 101-80 loss, their worst performance so far in Summer League. And they finished 3-2. Not the worst result in the world for the Hawks, but as I always say, wins and losses is not really the biggest thing. It's all about prospect evaluation. The Hawks have not played particularly well tonight, but Kobe Buck was pretty good. We'll talk about that later on in the episode, but we'll start this podcast as we have a lot in recent days, talking about some reporting nationally about the Hawks and trade rumors, if you even want to call them that. I hesitate to use the word rumors. It's not really anything brand new, but some interesting reporting from Mark Stein that I would say provoked a lot of questions that I was asked on Sunday. And because Summer League games don't really take up the same kind of depth as other games, there's a little bit of a window to talk about this stuff right now on the podcast. So we're going to lead with this. And we'll start with, again, Mark Stein of formerly of the New York Times, etc. He does the Substack newsletter, one of the best in the business. And he reported some stuff about Pascal Siakam and Clint Capela. So with Siakam in particular, Stein noted, quote, inherent skepticism around the league with regard to the Raptors and making major trades. He also did say, though, that he and others have come away thinking that the Raptors are at least exploring moves for Siakam. I'll say this. One of the central things that I heard in Vegas was general uncertainty around the Raptors. No one is super confident in what they are going to do, what they want to do, what they're willing to do. And it's even more muddled because of what they've just been doing the last couple of years, even, but especially like the last 6 months or so. They didn't trade Van Vliet. They didn't trade Gary Trent Jr., etc. Van Vliet ended up leaving for nothing, basically nothing anyway. Gary Trent Jr. Just opted into his player option, but they held on to Anunoby. They held on to Siakam. They also traded a lightly protected pick for Jakob Poeltl, who they then paid. So it's kind of a mixed bag with regard to the Raptors. So that's kind of what Stein's getting at and what I've definitely heard as well from being in Las Vegas the last 10, 11 days. I've also heard repeatedly, though, that the Hawks are interested. They're still interested. The door is still open on a transaction with regard to the Hawks and Pascal Siakam. Talks have happened in the recent past. I'm not sure if they're happening like today, but it is one of those things where like the Hawks never faded away despite maybe some incentive or maybe a sort of, inklings to the contrary. The Hawks have been in the mix the entire way for Siakam. Stein also mentioned previous reporting about Indiana and Orlando as potential shooters for Siakam as well, throwing in that the city of Orlando has been, quote, Siakam's preferred offseason training base for years, end quote. That doesn't really mean anything necessarily. It could matter on some level for Siakam and his willingness to kind of signal to the Magic. They might be willing to stick around. But in general, Orlando is not really a team that makes a ton of on-paper sense for Siakam, other than him just being good and making them better. He's an older forward with some shooting questions. The Magic have Paulo Banchero. The Magic have Franz Wagner. The Magic have Wendell Carter Jr. at center. They have a lot of forward depth in some ways. Siakam is, again, very, very good, though, and Orlando could be interesting to kind of go out for him if they want to with all of their assets on their roster. But, as far as only Siakam is concerned, nothing is hugely different here with regard to the Hawks. I think, again, from where I stand, from what I hear, the Hawks are still interested. I think the Hawks are smartly, from what I have heard, kind of drawing a line, and they don't want to go over that line. Some of these packages that I get sent from Raptors fans, I think in particular, are pretty outlandish packages, like Hunter and 3 of the young guys, or Hunter and 2 of the young guys plus 2 picks. I think for 1 year of control, and again, 1 year of control on Pascal Siakam, he might be able to extend, he might not, but one of those things where you're definitely only getting 1 year of control. You can't give up the entire farm. I think the Hawks are at least not trying to do that at this point in time. As for the second part of the reporting from Mark Stein that has to do with the Hawks, is that he wrote that there is league-wide perception, again, league-wide perception of, quote, increasing willingness, end quote, for the Hawks to trade Clint Capela. Now, I will just say this now. There's a reason I emphasized league-wide perception, because that's not the same thing as reporting directly on what the Hawks want to do. League-wide perception means that people in the league believe that, not what the Hawks are actually going to do, which I think is a key distinction. Anytime you're talking, not just for Mark Stein, but for any national reporter, the way that things are framed tells you a lot about what they have heard, what they will hear, etc. He also did report that the Mavericks, quote, are rooting for the Hawks to get Siakam, basically because they are hoping that a trade features Capela. So he notes, as I have many, many times in the last couple of weeks, that the Raptors have no need for Capela. But it also makes sense for the Hawks, for salary match purposes, to have it be Hunter, Capela, and whatever else because of how much money Siakam makes. So if that were to happen, Dallas could get in the mix as a 3-team deal destination. They are the most obvious team. They're not the only team that can get in the mix for a 3-team deal there, but certainly one that makes a lot of sense for everybody involved. The Mavs have wanted Capela all summer long, from what I have heard. That has not changed, according to the reporting from Stein. The Hawks have asked for quite a bit for Capela, which I think is important. There are different sort of levels to being available in trade. There are guys that you just want to trade actively. There are guys you're listening on. The Hawks have made Capela available all summer long, but they're asking for a lot, including what Stein reported, what I've also heard as well, dating back to the draft, is that the Hawks asked for Josh Green and number 10 for Capela and 15, I believe. That's a lot. And I'm not saying that that's like a slam dunk move, but it's certainly nothing. The Mavericks value Josh Green at a high level, which is why they said no to that deal. And it is hard to find a 2-team deal between Dallas and Atlanta. So one of the questions I got actually after this was kind of like, why don't Mavericks just trade for Capela as it is? Well, number one, it's kind of hard because Dallas doesn't have a ton to offer. They want to trade Tim Hardaway Jr. by all accounts, but the Hawks don't have any need for him. He's making a lot of money and kind of is repetitive what they already have as a 2-guard without a lot of defensive value, let's just say. It's a bad contract for the most part, etc. That's a deal that's underwater. They already traded Reggie Bullock, so Max Kleber would be interesting, but certainly like there's not a very natural 2-team deal or already would have happened probably between the Hawks and the Mavs about Capela. And this is the one thing I want to get to before we move on to the game itself tonight, is that I think one of the reasons, perhaps the main reason, but one of the reasons I'm pretty confident why people around the league, including Mark Stein and others, think that Capela could be had more easily in a trade if the Hawks were to trade for Pascal Siakam is the fit question with Siakam. Now, I've referenced this before, but just to kind of put a point on it now, because it came up again with Mark's reporting, and I got asked about this, I don't believe the Hawks have to trade Capela by any means. Because he's still very good, number one. I think I'm higher than most on him. He's a very valuable player, I would say an above-average starting center in the league. He's a very good player. And the Hawks have 48 good minutes of center play. There is a whole discussion to be had, which we will not do today, about Okongwu and his future. I like him quite a bit as well. The Hawks have probably overemphasized in terms of asset management at center with having both Capela and Okongwu. I'll be the first to say that. But anyway, I do believe firmly that it does make a lot more sense to be more active in trying to trade Capela if you invest heavily in a Siakam trade. Number one, because it's pretty natural to have it be Hunter Capela just to match salary. But even beyond that, I don't think the fit is great between Capela, Murray, and Siakam in particular. There's some real spacing questions there. Now, having Trey really helps that, and you can play those 4 guys, Trey, Murray, Siakam, and Capela, with a shooter at all times, whether it be Bogey or Griffin or Sadiq Bey. Like, there are options there. But you're talking about 3 guys. Murray and Siakam are not non-shooters, but they're not floor spacers by trade. Plus, Capela is a total non-shooter. And that's before you even mention the name of Jalen Johnson, who I like quite a bit and is right now a pretty challenged spacer. So you probably can't play those 5 guys together. Regardless, I would not go as far as to say that they have to trade Capela if they get Siakam. I have not said that. I will not say that. But I think it would be a good idea, generally speaking, to get Capela in a deal for Siakam out the door. Not because I don't like Capela. I think I value Capela a lot. But because I think he and Hunter make most sense as sort of the baseline money. And I think in general, Okongwu pairs better with that group the way that it would have to be constructed around Trey, Murray, and Siakam and whatever else. Now, that doesn't mean that every problem is solved. You still probably have to get, in my mind, another center in the mix. I think Bruno Fernando is a very competent third center. I think you would probably want to have a better option other than him behind Okongwu as a just sort of change-up option if you were to trade Capela. That's stuff that we talk about later on if it happens. But for the most part, I do think that what Stein kind of wrote today makes a lot of sense. What's kind of been out there, that if the Hawks get Siakam, it does make even less sense to hold on to Capela just because of the fit questions there and also the money, quite frankly, because I'll save this deep dive for later if necessary. I talked about it before on the podcast, but if you are trying to keep Siakam long term, which is a whole other question, if you have a salary structure that has Trey, Murray making $30 million a year and Siakam making $40 million a year or so, you can't really afford to have other guys making $20 million a year, which is where Capela is right now, where Conway's probably going to be in the future, where Hunter already is. Obviously, he'd be in a deal for Siakam, but Sadiq Bey, extension eligible, et cetera. Bogey's making $15 million a year, whatever it's going to be. So, money's a question there as well. Long story short, I do think that, as Stein reported, it makes a lot of sense to get Capela into a deal for Siakam, whether it's for Siakam directly or you turn around and do it after the fact because of the fit questions, money questions, etc. Okay, that's enough on that topic for now. We'll come back and talk about the deep dive into the final game of Summer League between the Hawks and the Mavericks this evening. But first, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. If you're in a DFS, you need to check out the award-winning app at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. It's awesome. I've been playing there for years now. It's very easy to use, whether you're doing it for the first time or you're actually a seasoned veteran with PrizePicks like I am. At PrizePicks, all you do is choose 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 players, then decide whether they actually have more or less a certain number of points or rebounds or yards in football, total bases or strikeouts in baseball, and more options from there. Win up to 25 times the money on your entries. They offer numbers on tons of sports that you might be looking for. The NBA, of course, college basketball, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA, soccer, etc. It's all right to get you to be done in just a minute or less as well. It's that quick and it's that easy. Plus, it's just you against the numbers. They have safe and fast withdrawals. They're operating in more than 30 states now, plus Canada. And you can go to PrizePicks.com or download the PrizePicks app right now to sign up. Play daily fantasy sports immediately. If you're a first-time user, get 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. Don't forget that promo code. It is locked on when you get there for the instant deposit match up to $100. Check it out now at PrizePicks, either on the app or at PrizePicks.com. All right, let us dive into the final Summer League game, and it was a pretty ugly one. It was a diehards, sickos-only atmosphere. The third to last game overall in Las Vegas. There was one game started a little bit after the Hawks did in the bigger gym, Thomas and Mack Center in Las Vegas. The Hawks played the final game of the entire week in Cox Pavilion, the smaller gym in Las Vegas, and only one game on Monday. So it's almost over in terms of the full Summer League run. In case you're not watching this podcast on YouTube, I am home after being in Las Vegas for the first 4 games. Not even I could justify hanging out for 2 full days in between games for the Hawks. So I am home. I was home for the game tonight, but I was the only person, I believe, in local media that was still there for game 3 and game 4. So I held out as long as I possibly could have getting on the scene in Las Vegas. But in general, it was by the end of the week, everyone's already burnt out. It's kind of the way it always is. And the Hawks play like that tonight, I will say. Starting, as far as the first half was concerned, it was much better than the second half. That's kind of a low bar to clear in a lot of ways. There was some nice ball movement early on. I thought Krejci had a nice cut for a layup on the first possession of the game. Cody Welke actually took an accidental elbow to the face from Omax Prosper, fellow first-round pick, on a drive. We drew offensive foul. The Hawks actually led this game 8-2 after about 4 minutes. Dallas actually had more turnovers than points for the first 5 minutes of this game. Buffalo had a couple of nice plays offensively. Rotationally, the Hawks did change things up a little bit. In fact, Marcio Santos made his first and only appearance of the entire week. That is sometimes what happens in Summer League, where the Hawks basically realize, okay, this guy hasn't played at all. We're going to want to have him play just for whatever reason. It could be anything, really, but he played in this game 18 minutes or so after not playing the entire rest of the way. Also, Tyson Etienne and David Singleton played for the second time this week out of 5 games. They brought in Brady Mannix. They played, actually, I believe it was 12 guys by the end. 12 guys by the end because they played Jarkel Joyner in the fourth quarter. So it was a pretty deep bench for the Hawks in this one. Seth Lundy had a couple nice blocks, actually, in the first half, which is good to see from him. The second unit, playing the 3 guys I mentioned before that had not played all that much, Santos, Etienne, and Singleton really struggled, along with, I believe it was mostly Lundy and Norris in the first half. It was a 10-0 run by Dallas in the second quarter to take the lead. They never actually relinquished that. Krejci rolled his ankle, left the game. Actually, he mixed a couple threes, then actually kind of fell over a camera person. Ended up being a left ankle sprain, which I reported during the game. That was kind of ruled him out for the game, and I guess subsequently for the entire week in Las Vegas. So, unfortunately, early end for Veep, but not too early. He played 8 minutes. That was kind of it. But the Hawks played a little bit better than that after the charge came back in the game. Kobe Buffkin actually took, I believe, at least one charge, maybe even 2 charges, had a block as well. The Hawks were only down by 4 at halftime of this game, despite shooting 4 of 22 from 3 in the first half and have 10 turnovers, but they actually had 17 second chance points before halftime. So they were kind of bludgeoning on the offensive glass to kind of get through things. Kobe had 10 in the first half, but that was kind of the end of the bright spots because the second half was really, really bad. And I'm saying that even by summer league standards, where like your eyes start to bleed after a while. I watched a lot of basketball the last basically 11 days in Las Vegas, both Hawks and otherwise. And my eyes glazed over at this point in time. But there was a run in the third quarter from Dallas. It was 28-6 in favor of the Mavs to go from up 3 to up 25. The Hawks had most of their issues were on defense, honestly. Dallas got hot. I'll say that, at least to be charitable. But the process is really bad. Like screen navigation, communication issues, rim protection issues, easy buckets for Dallas, like lots of dunks in the second half of this game for the Mavs that were like not particularly contested. Other than Kobe Buffkin's offense, I think he had 4 points in that run. That was kind of it. Everything else is kind of a mess. It was even worse when the bench came back in. It was just kind of a disaster. Now, it didn't really help things. The Hawks were also at that point 4 of 30 from three-point range at that point in the game. They missed their first 8 or 9 of the second half. The third quarter was basically so bad that it basically ended the week for the Hawks. It was 36-18 in the third quarter. I actually thought briefly and tweeted this as well that they were probably going to pull the plug on all of their kind of key guys. But they ended up coming back in for a few minutes in the fourth quarter, including Kobe Buffkin. But it was pretty rough. Full ball garbage time. They didn't stay in very long. And that was by the end, it was all of the kind of third team guys. This is not his fault. But Steph Lenny was minus 30 in this game in 22 minutes. So it kind of tells you how bad this game was all the way around for the Hawks. Some numbers here before you get to talk about the players at the end of the podcast. The Hawks ended up this game 7 of 42 from 3. Now, they were never going to win the game doing that. 7-42 is 17%. And that's a lot of three-point attempts, which I actually tend to like. But even with their advantage on the glass, which the Hawks did in this game they took more shots than the Mavs did. That was already going to sort of disqualify the Hawks. They didn't score more than 23 points in any quarter of this game. But defensively, it was really bad. Giving up 101 points in a 40-minute game. Keep that in mind. It's 40 minutes, not 48. Dallas shot 50% from the floor. They actually had 17 assists in this one. Lots and lots and lots of easy baskets. They did make a lot of not a ton. I mean, they were 10-28 from 3. That isn't crazy. Other than the 5 of 8 from Walker off the bench for Dallas. That was kind of it. But a lot of easy buckets. And it was clearly a slog. You know, my friend Wes Morton was tweeting like there was like lots of Benny Hill music in the second half of this game. I tend to agree. It was a rough watch. And I'm not sure I'm sure, you know, not being able to ask questions after this one for the first time this week, I would imagine guys were probably gassed. And, you know, they had 2 days off, but they did practice a little bit in Las Vegas. It's just a long time to be out there. By the second half, once that big run happened, you let go over the rope a little bit. It's kind of understandable and kind of just ready to go home at that point in time. Now, obviously, the summer continues to have, you know, work for these guys in particular to try to make the roster, all that fun stuff. But for the most part, it was kind of a thud at the end of the summer league run for the Hawks, and we'll leave that there for now. We'll have one more segment coming up, talk about the player-by-player evaluations, both like I guess in terms of the entire week and in terms of this game itself. But first, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. All right, and before we go on this Sunday into Monday, a little bit of a breakdown of the player contributions. And again, most guys struggled in tonight's game. And because the game just ended, I don't have the full week numbers sort of tabulated, but we'll start with the guys who were basically the guys who I would describe as having very little chance to make the roster. And that is Marshall Santos, that is Tyson Etienne, David Singleton, Jarkel Joyner, Brady Manick, also Plavšić and Pons did not play in this game, but had played earlier in the week. I include Manick in that, and I get a lot of questions about Manick because he had the one big shooting game. Manick is an NBA shooter. He's not much beyond that at this point in time. He does execute reasonably well, but just the tools are so limited defensively. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge. He had 11 points in this game. He's probably one of the better guys on the floor for the Hawks in this one, but I think he's more likely to be overseas probably again if I had to guess. But he could be in camp and be interesting. But if I had to, I mean, the Hawks also have a roster crunch, which is important to note. Joyner was largely a non-factor. He didn't play till the fourth quarter. Singleton made 2 threes. That's basically his calling card coming out of UCLA, but I don't think he's shown himself to be a big threat to make the team either. Etienne is a scorer. We saw him in College Park last year. He had one huge half last year in Summer League, but he was largely a non-factor as well this week. Miles Norris is the one guy off the bench that kind of played a smaller role that's actually supposed to be on the roster on a two-way contract. I thought he played reasonably well, although he was asked to play the 3 a lot today, which is not going to – I think that's going to be not where he plays for the most part. I think he's more of a power forward. He is 6'10". He had some mistakes like most guys did, but he was more competitive than most in this one. Had six rebounds, I should say, 4 points. He can shoot a little bit. That's probably his sales pitch going into the season on a two-way contract. That's kind of it for the guys off the bench in this one. Although, I'll also mention Seth Lundy. I poked fun at his plus minus. I don't really care about that. But he was 1 of 7 from 3. Sorry, 1 of 7 from the floor, 0 of 5 from 3 in this game. But defensively, he competed very well. He had 2 blocks. He was one of the only bright spots there, but still not a good game for him necessarily. But I still like Seth Lundy quite a bit. I think that package of 3 and D does translate to the league eventually. To the starters in this one. Krejci left the game after 8 minutes. Hopefully the ankle is not a serious issue. Of course, he and Tyrese Martin are the 2 non-guaranteed contracts. As a reminder, Tyrese Martin's guarantee date is later this week, so we'll know more about that in the very near future. But Krejci's is not until January, so we'll see on all that. But Vita, I thought, played pretty well this week on offense. Defensively, it's still a challenge, and that's kind of his calling card there. Martin was pretty rough in this one. I thought did a 4 assists, but a 5 points, 5 rebounds. He had the one big game as a scorer in this week where he actually made a bunch of shots late and on the way to a win. But overall, I thought it was kind of a rough week on offense for Tyrese, other than that one game. And then defensively, he competes for the most part, but a guy who is kind of limited. So, I think that if it's Krejci versus Martin, they will kind of just be choosing on what they want, sort of what they prefer. They're very different players, despite both being kind of wing-sized guys. But I thought Martin struggled tonight as well. Kabengele, same kind of thing as not necessarily a manic. Like I think Kabengele is closer to an NBA player. He was a first-round pick, but the limitations there defensively because of the rim protection are pretty clear. He does do the right stuff most of the time. He's a decent enough shooter. He can pass the ball a little bit for a center. He's rugged and rebound, but he's limited in some ways. Mohamed Gay, after the first game of the week where I saw a lot of people getting a little bit over their skis with regard to Mohamed Gay, the hype train has derailed a little bit. I think he's looked fine. I want to be very clear about that. I don't think he's looked bad. He had a couple of blocks this game as he has in almost every game. The jump shot looks pretty good. It didn't always go in at Washington State. It didn't always go in this week either, but it looks pretty good for his size. The tools are certainly there for Mohamed Gay. I think people got very, very, very overzealous after that first game, talking about how he was like going to play this year and going to be a factor in rotation. I think he's a second-round pick on a long-term deal, and they're going to be taking it slow with him, as they should. He's a young player. I saw some. I think some of the takes were probably somewhat in jest, but hopefully the last 4 games maybe brought some realism to the table. This is not me picking on Gay. I think that was a totally fine draft pick, a good contract. He's a very toolsy guy. I think it's going to be a very interesting development project for the Hawks long term. As far as right now, he is not ready, as most guys in the second round are not ready. And then Bufkin. So I thought Bufkin was easily the bright spot of tonight's game. That's a very low bar to clear, and he actually was 0 of 6 on 3, so he did not shoot the ball well for three-point range this week at all. Now, I'll stress this. It's 1 week, so I don't really care all that much about that. But there were some questions about Bufkin shooting coming in. I talked about that with Dylan Burkhart on this podcast, who covered him at Michigan. There is a range on where Bufkin's shooting is. I don't believe that he's a great shooter right now. I don't think he's this kind of shooter either, so we'll see. But that's an area to kind of keep an eye on. I thought he was really good off the bounce in this one, creating separation, getting to his spots. Floater game is definitely developing. Good mid-range game. He finished well in this game compared to other games as well. So I thought he was kind of in control offensively in this one. Only 1 assist, but if you watch the game, I think he set up 4 or 5, maybe more than that, threes that were just missed because nobody made a 3 in this game. So that kind of help keep your assists down. Also, 4 for Kabengele and 4 for Martin in this game, so it wasn't like it was just him. But I thought Bufkin, generally speaking, played pretty well on offense, and then had a couple of nice flashes defensively. Had a steal, had a block, and did his job. I've seen all kinds of ranges of takes on Bufkin, from people that are writing him off as a bust already, which is obviously insane, to the people that like maybe are too far ahead on this. I think I feel about the same as I did about Bufkin a week ago or 2 weeks ago, which isn't to say that was like some grand slam draft pick, but I like the pick. I think it's a very reasonable pick. I think it was definitely a future-facing pick. This is a perennial thing with fans and people in particular, is that, especially for guards, but really for any rookie, I think the tendency is always to have expectations that are too high for a guy's rookie season. That's going to be the case for the Hawks as well with Bufkin. And I think, honestly, at this moment in time, if the Hawks run it back with the same roster they have right now, they need to sign a guard or at least acquire a guard in some fashion, because I don't think Buffkin's ready to play, especially point guard right now in the NBA. I think the Hawks probably know that. And at the moment, they don't have another guy. It's Trey and DeJounte, obviously, but that's kind of it as far as their roster is concerned when they let Tata Washington go. So that'll be interesting to see what the Hawks do with that spot. And again, that's not me knocking Buffkin at all. They have Patty Mills if they hold on to Patty Mills. But Patty Mills, we'll see. There was a interesting reporting stuff on that with regard to like Woj immediately saying we don't know if they're going to keep him. If you keep him, obviously that kind of solves your issue. But Patty Mills is 35 years old. He's kind of, we'll see. Maybe that's the answer. But at the moment, it's Mills and then it's Buffkin. That's kind of it. So we'll see how they sort of address that in the future. Long story short, I think Buffkin's going to be fine. I feel the same way as I did before. There were some nice flashes this week. There were some moments of sort of improvement for sure. Strength is probably the biggest one for me, which I think we already knew coming in because I said that on this podcast 2 weeks ago, etc. So, overall, he was fine. He didn't blow anybody away, but he also, I think, got a lot of deserved credit from the staff and from people around the team closely for just like not getting really at all deterred. Like he's a confident guy. He played hard the entire way. He was focused. He was what you want to see from the first round pick. So we'll see. But overall, the Hawks played reasonably well in Summer League. Until tonight. Obviously, tonight was pretty bad. But 3-2 record, I don't care about that, but it doesn't matter. Like they were competitive. They had 6 or 7 guys playing the whole time until the very end. Everybody except for AJ played today still. Oh, one more thing on that before we get out of here. I got questions again today. Like I was the one that reported first that AJ was not going to play after the first 2 games. That was always the plan. There was, I guess, I'm not sure if this came from somewhere or what, but I got a rash of questions tonight about like whether AJ was sitting for trade purposes. The answer to that is no. Could they trade him? It's conceivable. I wouldn't say it's probable by any means, but the plan always, just to reiterate this one more time, was to have AJ play twice and then not play anymore. And everybody else play the whole rest of the week, obviously until Veit got hurt tonight. So I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory or what, but it's a very normal thing for a second year guy who was a first round pick in the rotation last year to play 2 games and not play anymore. That's what AJ did. It was totally fine. And there you go. All right. That's it for today's podcast, I should say. And also for my kind of game by game breakdowns from Summer League. I have some guests lined up in the near future to talk about probably a little bit more of Summer League stuff and prospect analysis. And then we'll talk about the roster more. And just as a reminder, if you are a new listener, we don't stop the podcast because the season is basically dead now. As of today, there are no more Hawks events until training camp in September. So a lot of people cool off after that. I don't blame you. It's just what it is. I don't ever stop this podcast. Now, we won't be doing 5 episodes a week in August because that's the dead month, but I will have something for you every couple of times per week the entire way through the offseason, and we never stop. So keep that in mind. I'll have roster breakdowns. I'll have analysis. I'll have guests on. I'll be looking ahead at training camp. If there's trade stuff, we'll obviously talk about that. Roster crunch situations, all that stuff. I will be here throughout the entire offseason. So please subscribe to the podcast. Please take a minute and tell your friends about the show as well. Auto-download the podcast. Ratings and reviews are appreciated as well on Apple and Spotify, etc. Thank you for listening, everybody. Hopefully this was coherent as I am jet lagged and also watching a 9:30 tip-off. It's now after 1 a.m. Eastern time, so hopefully this was a coherent podcast. I do thank you for listening, as always, and we'll see you all next time.